Come party with the Geek Legion.
Hit subscribe!
A pariah director and a cancelled star brings us Citizen Vigilante. And this is a 2026 movie directed by Uwe Boll, a somewhat prolific director from Germany, initially known for making a lot of low-budget video game movie adaptations, but then got also some notoriety, shall we call it, by making some somewhat controversial kind of style action movies, of which this is another one. And it stars Armie, who of course has fallen out of favour in Hollywood. It also stars Costas Mandylor. So when I saw this, I thought it was going to be basically a kind of Death Wish style, vigilante justice style movie, and that is part of it, but it also is more political than maybe Death Wish and movies like that. Now, before I go into the plot and stuff, let me just tackle the politics. I'm not going to tell you how you should feel about certain political issues. How I'm going to tackle this movie, I will tell you about the plot and you know, what the message is. It's up to you whether you agree or disagree with that. I'm simply going to review the movie based on its quality as a film, its production, you know, its direction, its acting, yada yada yada. I'm not gonna either plus or minus this movie based on my political beliefs or anything like that. I'll talk to you about it, but that isn't going to be what forms my opinion about this movie. That being said, what is the movie? So this film was filmed in Croatia, and at the beginning of the movie it says somewhere in Europe, so it's not trying to tie itself to any particular country. But effectively what it's saying is that the illegal immigrants that are coming into countries and committing crimes, and we have seen some of this, you know, in the UK, and it's been kind of quite widely documented, are preventable crimes basically, and you know, the charges of these countries, European countries, are importing criminals, and they're getting away with it. And Armie Hammer's character is a guy who is pushing back and is a sort of anti-authority figure who is going after both the criminals and the kind of the system that has allowed them to get away with it, at least in his eyes. So we follow him as he ends up talking to victims, taking out, you know, people who he feels have committed these crimes, taking on the kind of the judges. He's being pursued by Costas Mandylor's Interpol agent, who is obviously trying to kind of stop him. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So this obviously is going in a very kind of direction, a particular direction in regards to its politics. And again, it's up to you whether you agree or disagree. I'm really going to stay out of the actual politics side, and we're just going to talk about what works and doesn't work with the movie. So, what works with the movie? Armie Hammer was quite a big deal at one point, or at least he was on the precipice of being so. And, you know, as I say, he's kind of fallen out of favour with Hollywood. But you know, he certainly has got talent as an actor, and you know, he's kind of having to take these kind of roles now, but still he has a commanding presence in this role. There's this cold, calculated sort of figure who does have some interesting elements to his character. We learn that he comes from money. He's very wealthy. He kind of owns a great lot of property, and he's kind of renting these out. And he seems to be quite a hard landlord. So you know, there's some interesting kind of things that you know, it's somewhat inconsequential, to be brutally honest. But you know, it gives him a little bit of sort of idea about his character. Maybe not as much as I would like, but we'll come on to that. But certainly some interesting aspects, and we see him with this kind of ruthless, cold efficiency through the movie. But I still think Armie Hammer manages to kind of have this sort of, you know, sort of charisma to his character. And it's also, he doesn't always deal with the people who he deems as criminals the same way. And it isn't just kind of all immigrants. For example, there's a scene where the movie, he sees these two guys basically trying to date rape some women in a bar, and they kind of, you know, they put some drugs in the drinks, and he basically, when they aren't looking, swaps the drinks. So they end up, these guys end up taking these, you know, these drinks with the drugs in, and they end up kind of like passing out. So it's how, you know, there's different ways that he is kind of dealing with all these kind of varieties. Some more high profile, some kind of, you know, behind the scenes, so to speak, like that one, for example. So there's a little bit of kind of variety in what he's kind of doing in regards to, you know, dishing out his kind of brand of justice and stuff like that. He also almost sort of asks permission from the victims to try and you know, take out. For example, there's the kind of the crescendo of this movie is this kind of gang of rapists that have raped this kind of 14-year-old girl, and he basically goes to the kind of the family and, without kind of saying what he's going to do, asks them if they want justice. So there were some interesting kind of elements to this movie. And I do think it tries to have a counterpoint with Costas Mandylor's character, who tries to argue, you know, for the other side, sort of saying for society to exist, basically it has to have rules, and these rules, you know, are what makes democracy and stuff. So, you know, although it's definitely sort of one going a particular way politically, there is at least some attempt here to, I think, have a counter argument, at least you know, an element of one. So, you know, there is that. I do think, you know, I actually don't mind some Uwe Boll movies. Like, you know, he gets a bad rap, but although I wouldn't say he's necessarily a fantastic filmmaker, I've enjoyed some of his movies maybe more than the kind of like your average people who would sort of jump on the bandwagon and sort of say that they're all sort of trash. But there are elements in this movie, there are sequences where I think are kind of quite well directed. There's a scene like we have all these kind of armoured police kind of personnel, kind of carriers and things like that getting towards this building. And there's some nice, you know, there's some nice kind of like way it's kind of filmed and things like that. The action sequences are relatively sparse, to be honest with you, but when we see them, they are brutal and bloody, and you know, there's a sort of a good use of practical kind of VFX that look effective and look, you know, violent and devastating to the human body, should we say. So it certainly doesn't shy away from showing you the kind of the impact of, for example, gun violence and things like that. So, you know, for brutal violence, this movie certainly, you know, has that in spades. And, you know, we have seen Uwe Boll do other films kind of like this. The Rampage films, for example, had a sort of somewhat, again, an anti-authority sort of slant to them. So, you know, there is some stuff here which I think you can kind of say that sort of works and is well done to a degree. So let's talk about what doesn't work. I think, again, we're not going to talk about the politics. That's up to you. But outside of that, the main issue with this, I think, is the real lack of characterization and setup for this movie. So what is Armie Hammer's motivation? We don't know. It's never established. We don't know why he's doing this. We're told that he's ex-military, but we don't know his motivations for doing this. It's never kind of got into. We never really. He's already kind of doing this as the movie kind of starts, and he's just doing it because he can. But the other thing I would say with this is that it paints, in some respects, the Armie Hammer character to have this kind of strict moral code. But then he breaks it himself. For example, there's a sequence where, towards the end of the movie, in the kind of the second half of the film, where he runs someone off the road, just a random person off the road, just to kind of prove a point, and ultimately says they're probably dead. Well, you've just murdered someone, but then you're going after people who have murdered people, and it just seems like he has this sort of strict sort of moral code, so to speak, where he feels like he's kind of righting wrongs because the authorities won't do it, but then he blatantly kills someone, and it just, you know, it just kind of like, man, sort of, it doesn't really make sense, to be honest. But that's not the only thing that makes sense. I think this movie's full of just kind of like quite poor storytelling, if I'm honest. So we don't know anything about the Armie Hammer character. He just is, right? Great. How have Interpol got hold of him? We don't know. They seem to be tracking him. We don't know how. There's a scene where, there's the scene, as I mentioned earlier, where Armie Hammer swaps the drinks over. Costas Mandalore's Interpol agent is in the bar at this time. Now, it's not clear if he's in the bar just by chance, or if he's actually tracking Armie Hammer's character to this point. And we don't, if he is, we don't know how he's got to that point, or if he just happens to see that. But it's a bit of a stretch if he just happens to see it, just because he sees, you know, a guy swapping drinks around, that he must be this vigilante killer. It just doesn't make any sort of sense, unfortunately. The movie's script, and Uwe Boll did write this as well as produce it, it's just all over the place. The movie as well adds to the confusion, where it kind of tells the story sort of out of order. So it ends up kind of going all over the place in regards to sort of sequences and things like that, and you're not quite sure, you know, what's happening when and things, because the movie's narrative is not particularly good to start with, and it ends up being even further muddled by having a kind of a, you know, a non-linear style of kind of storytelling, but only to a point, because the movie does sort of start at a certain point and ends at a, you know, a later point. There's also some questionable things here where, for example, there's a sequence where the police find out where Armie Hammer is living, and Armie Hammer locks himself into this like kind of safe room, but with like gun sort of turrets, and the police just line up to get shot, and he kills probably more police officers in this movie than criminals. So again, it's like really questionable in regards to its sort of moral grandstanding, I have to say. The other thing as well, I mean, this movie is being filmed in a non-specific European country, right? And we know it's filmed in Croatia, but it doesn't say it's necessarily taking place in Croatia. But everyone here is speaking English, but in kind of like broken English. So they're obviously probably local actors who are speaking English. And as such, the acting from a lot of the kind of the supporting cast is a little bit on the weaker side. Costas Mandalore, for some reason, is putting on an accent which kind of goes in and out. So the acting is a little mixed, I gotta be honest with you. But the movie just feels like, narratively, it's just all over the place. And this is the main criticism for me, to be honest. I think there are elements of this movie that have sequences that I think are kind of quite well done. I think Armie Hammer kind of, I mean, some of the kind of the dialogue is very exposition heavy, I have to say. I don't necessarily blame Armie Hammer for that. It's just the script, clearly. But the dialogue isn't brilliant. Armie Hammer, I think, does the best he can in it, and does still make for quite an interesting character. Almost like a kind of psychopathic Batman. I mean, I know Batman is sometimes portrayed to be like that, but truly psychopathic. But it's, to be honest with you, it's a below average film with some interesting moments within it. As for the politics, as I say, you know, this is gonna appeal to certain people more than it is gonna be for others. That's not a kind of a factor that I'm going to put into this film in regards to its score. That's up to you, whether you agree or disagree, whether you want to watch this or not. Based on that, it's entirely up to you. But purely based on what I've mentioned in regards to its positives and negatives, I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you used it? Leave me comments, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
To become immortals, subscribe to the Geek Legion of Doom.